It's Jason with Threefold Solutions talking about workflows today. Hey, if this is your first time getting into Planning Center People workflows, that's what this video is for. This is a quick introduction to help you get started with Planning Center People workflows. If you like these kinds of videos, give us a like. Subscribe to our channel. We make all kinds of content for people who want to utilize Planning Center and utilize it better. Enough with the commentary. Here's that video. Let's just jump into workflows right now and let's take a look at the user interface. This is a familiar interface that you're going to see in a couple different places in Planning Center. This might look a little familiar if you visited LIST before. We've got this campus dropdown in the top left-hand corner, as well as some category dropdowns. If you're a multi-campus site, sometimes you might want to assign workflows to your campuses. You can do that where you set up the campuses and assign a label, like you see over here on the right, to the actual workflow. This not only helps you to kind of filter and sort your workflows, but it also kind of helps you keep things standardized. And when you're in a multi-campus site, sometimes you want to make sure everybody's using the exact same flow, the exact same step process, and this just helps you really keep things standardized. Now, categories are great because over time, your workflows are going to build up. And if you want to find something quickly, this allows you to go to volunteers and see just those specific volunteer-based workflows. You can do the same thing with any category, but again, they're really for filtering and finding things quickly, just keeping things in order more than anything. All right, let's jump into a couple of the other settings that you see below that. There's a couple things that you just need to be familiar with. This thing called My Cards. Well, when you click on My Cards, you're seeing the cards or the profile cards that have been assigned to you in various workflows. You can also see those represented by this little green circle or bubble, and every time you see one of those, there's cards waiting for you to participate in or take action on. Now, right below that, you'll see recently viewed. If you've been working on something previously, you can click on that and jump right back into it. All workflows is just a way to cut through the filters that you may have set with campuses or categories and just get back to show me everything right away. And then right below that, we have something called unassigned workflows. Just know that unassigned workflows primarily have to do with people who may have no longer been on staff and had some permissions, or they've created a workflow and maybe you weren't aware of it, but they're no longer on staff. You've removed their permissions and now that workflow has gone abandoned, so to speak. That shows up in the unassigned workflows area, and it allows you to then give that workflow a new owner, or what they call a default assignee. And that would allow somebody else to pick it up and start to manage it. Okay, enough about the navigation. Let's jump over into making a new workflow starting from scratch. So I'm going to click on this button in the top right-hand corner, and we're just going to go ahead and make a test workflow. So I'm going to call this test. I'm actually going to just make this test workflow. Okay, now let's go ahead and, if we have a campus, set that campus. If we have a category, go ahead and set it. In this case, we're just going to call it a care workflow. Let's go ahead and click create our workflow. And now you start off with the very first items you need to consider when making workflows. And that is who's going to participate in this workflow. And those are called collaborators. You'll see this little box over here on the left. You need to think about who is also going to participate in this workflow. Am I the only one managing it? If so, no problem. Leave yourself in there. If you need to add additional collaborators, we have to give them access through a couple different permission levels. Now, you can add a person individually, and when you add that person, you can basically type their name in, they'll show up, and now you can decide the level of permission that you want to give them so they can interact with your workflow. In this case, we have the first default as edit assigned cards. What that means is this person is able to see cards that are assigned to them. And that's really kind of limited when you think about it. You may have a bit of a sensitive workflow. In this workflow, you may have things that not everyone needs to see. Maybe there's information being shared, there's notes, etc. And in some instances, you only want people to see the cards that you assign to them. That would be this permission, edit assign cards. Now there's also edit all cards, and that allows you to give that person access to every card in the workflow so they can jump in and help out. They can answer any questions or walk another card through a series of steps on their own. They are able to see all cards. The next one is manage workflow, and that's the highest level. And what that allows you to do is change anything in this workflow. You can add a step, reorder the steps, change the text on the steps. It basically allows you to manage the whole workflow. Okay, let's also talk about this real quick. Up here at the top, I don't want to forget to mention this, you have this actions button. Now, this is one way you can edit the settings on your workflow if you want to change the name, or you want to change the category, or even a campus. But oh, by the way, you can also delete here. So if you want to delete the workflow at some point, which would be pretty drastic, you could do that. So just keep that in mind. But there's one other important thing found here, and that is duplicate the workflow. Now, in this particular situation, we have the ability to literally duplicate this workflow and all of its steps. This is a big time saver, especially when you're at a multi-campus site. You have multiple workflows that you want to build for each campus, and it's basically making it simple for you to take that existing framework of steps and text and duplicate everything. So amazing feature. It was just added not too long ago. We are so happy with this new duplicate workflows form. Thank you, Planning Center. So let's move on. Okay, now let's get to adding a step. So we've got our collaborators in here. Let's go ahead and add our first step. Now, the first thing that you're going to want to look at here is defining the step itself and then the action that needs to be taken. So this one lists a welcome phone call. We're just going to go ahead and roll with that. So welcome phone call is step number 1. Now, when you put your description in, generally you're going to have a process. And let's say maybe this is, we said a test workflow, and maybe it's a care type of workflow, but regardless of what your workflow is, if somebody's got to communicate, whether that's a phone call or whether that's an email or a text, the idea is that you spell out the action to be taken. So when you put that action here, detail it really well. And the reason why you'd even bother doing that is someday you may go on vacation, or the person you're assigning this to may go on vacation, and you need somebody to step in and assist you. If you don't want to have to do a ton of training every single time you need help with the workflow, one of the most important things is to be very descriptive. And I would even say here, when you detail the action to be taken, you go so far as to provide a phone script if it's necessary, maybe an email template if that's helpful. Spell it out. Put all of the details right here, and you can expand this box a little bit to keep adding text. But if it is a phone call, give them some talking points. If it's an email, give them a template that they can copy and paste. There's a lot of different things you can do here, but the more information, the better. And it even goes so far as to say, complete the step and move to the next step. It's obvious, but it just doesn't hurt to spell it out. Complete step. It moves to the next step. It's just good to know. You might have a series of 1, 2, 3 things that you need to do on this step, and then you say complete step. Now, once you've done that, you've got the default assignee. Now, on step number 1, the default assignee is truly the manager, or what I like to call the broker of this workflow. And the reason why is because on step 1, cards will flow into this workflow and they will need to have action taken. Now in Planning Center, we're not allowed to take somebody and put them directly onto step 2 or step 3 or step 4. We have to start at step 1. That means you're the gatekeeper. If you're on step 1 and you're the default assignee, you may have to move somebody who's coming into the workflow to the next step or to several others. And that means you have to skip a step, and move them. I wish we could do it the other way and just say introduce them onto step 3, but we're not able to do that at this time. So in that situation, you're going to want to act as that broker or that manager. And when the card comes in, you're going to need to know who gets to be assigned to this card. Who do I need to give this to? Or do I just take it all the way through each of the steps? However it works, you're the manager, you're the bus driver, you're basically making the calls when you're default assignee number 1 on step 1. Now, you've got a couple options here. You've got this auto snooze and you've got this expected response time. Let's talk about expected response time first. You can assign a number of days that you want somebody to take action within. And what this allows you to do is basically have some accountability in your workflows. We don't want people to fall through the cracks. So what this is allowing you to do is basically say the expected response time is 3 days. I would like you to take action within those 3 days. If somebody doesn't take action, the card becomes overdue. And we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But what that means is you've basically got a reminder that this card is past due, it's overdue, and a little red icon will show up. You'll also get an email communication every day nagging you to let you know that you have an overdue workflow card. So Planning Center is really particular about this. We can see workflow notifications in a couple different areas, which we'll look at in just a moment. But the main thing is you'll get that nag email based on the fact that the settings are that way. And we have some email preferences. You can turn that off, but I recommend leaving those on. So let's take a look at that just so you know. Now, I'll come back to auto snooze in just a moment. So let's go ahead and create this step, and let's jump out for just a moment back to the front door of workflows. Let's click on that. And you'll notice down here in this notification preferences area, I intentionally skipped this before. I wanted to mention that you can say, please send me an email when cards are assigned to me, or become overdue. If you uncheck this box, then those cards will become overdue and they will not send you that nag email. But I actually like to leave this on because I need a reminder sometimes, and I know some people on my team could benefit from it as well. So I do prefer to leave that on. Now, that's enough said about that. You'll know which ones to leave it on for and which ones not. So I'm going to move back over to our test workflow. We just created it. We actually stuck it in the care category, and it's right down here. So let's jump back in here. Now, in this situation, we've created one step. And our first step is a welcome phone call. Now you'll notice we've got the default assignee set up here. Like I said, that person is acting as the broker or the manager of the workflow. Now, if we add some additional steps, and we'll just say this is step 2, and again, detailed actions. Make sure you spell it out. Detailed action for this step. And then again, we can talk about the expected response time. How many days do you want to give somebody to take action here? And then let's talk about this auto snooze. So when this is selected, maybe this particular step in the workflow needs to be a week later. And so when somebody completes step 1 and it moves to step 2, if auto snooze is turned on, we can say wait 1 to however many days, or we can say 1 week or 1 month. So maybe we set it to 1 week, and whenever a card comes into step 2, it pauses or snoozes for 1 week. At that time, 1 week from now, it will literally have a pop-up reminder and email reminder to tell you at that time that you have action to be taken on a card. And that's basically how it works. Now, you'll have 3 days from the time in which that card wakes up. It's no longer snoozed. That's when the expected response time kicks in. If there's no snooze, the expected response time starts when the card enters that step. So just use that wisely. Sometimes you need that. Maybe you're doing something like a volunteer onboarding and you have to order a background check, and that might take a week or so. That would be a step where you're verifying the background check is complete, but you want to wait a week or so, so you snooze that for a period of time. That's a good use of using the snooze. It's also a way, once again, to get that reminder so people aren't falling through the cracks and we're forgetting about them. Okay, so let's go ahead and create step 2. So now we've got a welcome phone call. We've got step 2. We have the ability to reorder these steps. So if we build a bunch of steps and we decide later, I'd like to change the order. You can change the order on those by dragging and dropping when you click that reorder steps button. So just FYI on that. Now you'll notice right below that there's a green little label or circle here that says assign to you. And then there's another that's kind of grayish or light blue, and it says assign to others. That has to do with these little circles that notify you when there's a card in your workflow and it's assigned to you or somebody else. Now, let's manually add somebody into this workflow. I'm going to use our friend Luke Skywalker. So Luke has some data in here, but we're going to go ahead and add him just as it is. I'm not going to change anything, but I want you to see I could change who I'm actually adding. I could also assign this to somebody else in my workflow. So if I reassign the card, I can just type their name in. Now, we'll talk more about that in just a second because they have to be a collaborator in order to actually jump in here. So I might have to make sure first that I've either added groups of people by permission level, such as all managers, or I've added all of the individuals that need to be part of my workflow, and then I can reassign that card. Now, I can also pin an assignment to myself. And if I pin it to myself, that means regardless of who the default assignee is on step 2, 3, 4, whatever, I'm going to keep it with me, and I'm going to walk this card through all of the steps because it's pinned to me. So that's what pinning the assignment means. Now let's go ahead and add Luke Skywalker into our workflow, and you'll notice right away I get a green bubble up here in the top left, and that means it's assigned to me. It's ready for me to take action. And you'll notice over here on the right, it says ready, but there's also the snoozed area. So if this card were snoozed, that's where the little one would show up. And I have to pay attention to that because sometimes there may be cards in the queue, they're just snoozed and they're not out in the open and obvious to see. Okay, so now let's just talk about this cards assigned to drop down for just a moment. When there are other people in the workflow, you will see when cards are assigned to other people. In this situation, I am going to use Luke Skywalker here, and I'm basically going to assign him to somebody else. So I'm going to click here to reassign, and I'm going to reassign it to Michael. Now, once I load Michael's information in here, he's now the person who's now seeing this. As I've done that, you can now see that the little green bubble is gone. It's no longer assigned to me, but I do see the light blue bubble that has a 1 in it. That means it's assigned to somebody else. The only way I can see who it's assigned to is to click on the little drop down and see that it's currently assigned to somebody else who's also participating in the workflow. So that's important to remember. Now, obviously, when we've set up our instructions up here, when we click on a card, and I'm just going to click view card and do that now, you get to see all of that again. This is all of the instructions or detailed action that you've put down for people on this step. In this case, maybe it is a welcome phone call, and we've reached out to this person, and now it's time to leave a note. Now, if I'm helping because I'm somebody jumping in to do this workflow, or I'm the default assignee, either way, I can leave a note here to say, had a phone call with Luke, and then, all the details, right? So just put all the details here, spell it out, and you can save this note. Now, if you save this note here, it will show up down below in the history. You're starting to create a little bit of an activity history down below here. You'll notice here, Threefold Solutions reassigned this card to Michael Visser. That literally shows you an action that was taken. If I'm somebody who's jumping into this workflow late or, a few weeks down the road, and I would like to know what's happened with this card so far, I'm going to go to this history, and I'm basically going to review all of the different steps that have been, or actions that have been taken here. Now, one other thing about notes, you can click here and add that note, and now somebody else can see that note. I spoke to Luke, we had this conversation, we talked about XYZ. What if you talked about something that was so important you needed to save that note to his profile? That's this button here. If I choose to save this note to Luke's profile, I may have a specific note that I would like it to be written to. In this case, maybe it's a pastoral note, and I would like to save this note to his profile for future reference and in the notes category. So this is just going to be saved note. And so I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, it looks the same, but you have to remember this particular note was actually saved to the profile. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't denote that down here, but sometimes these notes, important as they may be, they may be saved to his profile on a note itself. Okay, so that's how we use the internal notes, but let's talk about the email functionality. So let's say I have to, part of my step is to reach out to Luke via email. And in this particular tab, I have the ability to put in a test, email here just to show you. So let's just do test, email message goes here. And this is literally what's going to be sent to Luke. And now I can go ahead and send it. Now this is just a fake email address for Luke, but I'm going to go ahead and send it so you can see there is another history item down here. It shows us the subject and it shows us the body of the message. And the cool thing is if Luke replies to this, it will also show up in line down below here, and I can keep up with the conversation so I can know exactly what's happening if I'm jumping in to help out later. So again, great reason to have this history down here. Now let's talk about the next button. It's called Perform Action. Now in this particular area, you have some automated actions that can happen. Now these are manual because you're doing them yourselves, but if you pay attention and you've ever looked at automations before, you'll notice these look exactly the same as the automations because these are the built-in actions that you can take inside of Planning Center depending on your permissions. Now if you have permissions to every app, you may very well see that each app has actions associated with it. In this particular area, I like to use people because it has the most actions available. And sometimes you have to think about what action would I take when I put somebody into a workflow. Well, the idea is that you've communicated with them. This workflow has a purpose and a process. Maybe part of it is membership. And through your conversation, you've decided that Luke has become a member and you're going to go ahead and update his membership type. And you can go down here and change it from maybe it was attender to member. Or maybe it's something where you'd like to add them to an additional workflow. Maybe in talking to them, they're interested in serving and they want to volunteer. Maybe you have a special workflow set up for that and you can choose add to workflow, and right while you're in this workflow we can go ahead and just send them to the volunteer onboarding workflow, and we can literally click perform action. Luke will be automatically sent to that workflow and somebody's going to follow up with him from that workflow. So we can move people from one workflow to another. Now keep in mind, just because I'm moving him, unfortunately, his history will not go along for the ride. So all of these details do not go with it. He's starting that other workflow fresh, just so you know. Now, there are plenty of different actions here. Just investigate, check them all out. There's a couple that I like here, especially like background check status. You can set this right here without having to leave the workflow whatsoever. Now, if you use Checker, who's the integrated partner with Planning Center, you get some additional ones where you can actually order the background check without even leaving this card. You can do everything right here on the workflow itself. Really super handy. Now, one of the other things that you could also do is you can update custom fields. So if you want to update certain information on their custom field, you can do the exact same thing. And it's not limited to people. Obviously, if this were a workflow dealing with volunteers and onboarding, and maybe you've gone through all the preliminary things, but it's now time for them to be put on a team to serve, you could literally go in here with services and you could say add to team, and then you can go in and select the actual team and you can get all the way down to the position, and then you just reach out to the person who oversees that team and let them know, I've added somebody new to your team that's gone through the process and they're ready to be scheduled. So again, some really cool features here. Add people to groups, sign them up for registrations, check them in. Home has tasks that you can create here. Check it out. There's lots of different things you can do with actions inside a workflow. Okay, so once you're done with your step, obviously you just click on complete step, and that's going to move us to the next step. Now again, if this had one of those automated snooze steps here, it might go into snooze mode. You might wonder what that looks like. Well, you can manually set that as well, which I'm going to do now, but ultimately, let's say you're talking to Luke and he says, you know what, I'm going to be on vacation for a week. Could you please follow up with me in a week? Well, you're supposed to respond to this within 3 days. In this particular instance, I would recommend that you snooze for 1 week, and you will notice right away it goes into the snooze mode and it now says snoozed until Wednesday. Now on Wednesday, if we have an expected response time, that's when it'll start. So this is what it looks like. Now, if we were to close this card, and we were to look right now on step 2, you don't see anything here. But when you move, you'll notice on Threefold Solutions, who's the default assignee, because we moved it to step 2, we now have a card listed in the snoozed area. And if we click on that, you'll see this little alarm clock icon that says this is snoozed until Wednesday. So that's how you can kind of keep up with which ones are live and need to be acted on right now and which ones are snoozed. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unsnooze this one. So we'll go down here and click unsnooze, and now your complete step actions come back. Notice you can also send to the previous step if you need to. I'm going to point out that there are several places where you can keep track of workflow cards that are waiting for you to take action. Number one, over here on the right, you have a little clipboard. Normally that's to add a task. Well, let's say you don't want to add a task. If you click that little arrow, you'll notice that you also have all of the workflows that are waiting for you here. This allows you to keep track of all the cards that are, looking for your attention. Now, that's not the only place. You can go back to the dashboard, and on the dashboard, you also have something here called My Workflow Cards. And you can notice here, all of the cards that are waiting for you to take action are listed here. Now, there's a whole nother set of areas where you can see workflow cards and get reminders, and that's under the home screen, and it has to do with the cards, My Workflow Cards, that may be assigned to you. And I've set up one of these widgets, and if you add a widget here, select People, you can use My Workflow Cards as well as many other things, but that allows you to create a widget on your home screen that you can go to every day when you start your day. And this is a great one because it'll give you an opportunity to basically manage all of the things happening in your world from this dashboard. It's a good one. I recommend it. So that's basically workflows in a nutshell, but ultimately you have to build it, you have to walk through it, and you have to go through these steps to really start to understand it. Now, many times you're going to have a process that you go through already, and that process may have to do with following up with people, communicating with people, sending them information, signing them up for things, and just helping them in general. That's the idea of workflows. But there are other ways to use workflows, and that has to do with internal processes. Sometimes you may deal with facilities type requests in workflows. Sometimes you may deal with permissions requests for planning center, and you want to assign people permissions, but you put them into a workflow to follow up with them. Anytime you need some type of reminder or a task, or you simply want to have a series of steps that you need to walk through, workflows can fit the bill. They work really well. They're not just for ministry processes and keeping people from falling through the cracks. They're also made for helping you on internal processes as well. So hopefully that helps you get started with workflows. That's a quick overview. Hope this one helped. For now, we'll see you in the next video.